Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream event on the 5th of July 2022. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on board. And seeing as it's such a cold evening, good to see you on the chat. And of course, the day the RBA put the rates up by another 50 basis points. So Chris and I will be talking about that amongst many other things. As normal, just before I bring Chris in, let me just remind you that we don't provide specific property or financial legal advice on the show. We do moderate the chat. This is as of the 5th of July 2022, and if you want to go ask a question, use that Walk the World. That makes sure that it comes into my queue so I can see it. And we've also enabled Super Chat, which means that if you want to get your question at the top of the list, you can do that, or indeed make a contribution to what we do here. That's always greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that out the way, let's bring Chris in. Chris, hello. How are you doing?
Martin, always good to see you. I'm doing very well, thank you. How's yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. Middle of winter. RBA putting the rates up. Very cold. Your listings higher than they should be. What's going on?
I mean, it's an interesting time of the year. It's obviously school holidays, winter. You always see a drop in listings at this time. Plus, you've got a lot of negative news spin and, RBA lifting rates and, a lot of media frenzy really kicking off, and buyers are very cautious. There's very low stock on the market. They're very tentative. They're very not sure what to do, a bit confused, to be honest. So it's been a massive shift from late 2021, right? And I think people are very similar to sort of 2018, I feel at the moment. It's sort of like 2018 was, you couldn't get access to loans, and people was the Royal Commission and, how lending was going to change was really worrying, and the negative gearing changes and all these, et cetera. I think, and buyers were just sitting on their hands, and that's pretty much what buyers are doing at the moment. They're sort of looking out and they're going, well, there's nothing on the market. I can't find anything that's good. I don't even want to look at that. If the rate's going to go up to 4 or 5%, I don't want to pay that price. And so property is going through a bit of a tough time getting repriced to higher rates. And I think, everyone's unsure about where they're going to go to, right? And until people get that certainty, people don't want to take action. Humans are very much like that, right? We want to know exactly how things are going to play out and then we all go at it. And so I think at the moment, that's what's happening.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that there's not much around. In fact, in some areas, listings are quite high, but when you look at the properties that are actually listed, they're actually not particularly good quality properties, right? So there's a big difference, I think, between the total listings and the good quality listings that are on.
Look, I mean, you can always type in any high-rise hotspot, right? And, Rosebery in Sydney or North Ryde or Sydney Olympic Park or Melbourne, you might go Docklands or, Richmond, et cetera. And you'll see that there's a glut of, high density that's always on the market. And that stuff didn't go up in the last couple of years under 2% interest rates. So you got to really wonder how it's going to survive when rates go to 4 or 5%. And so, there's listings in some pockets. But then if you might shift it to looking at the housing market in certain pockets around the city, and you look at what's actually on the market, it's the busy roads, it's the dark, it's the weird blocks, it's the weird floor plans, it's the things that have got privacy problems or noise issues or et cetera. And, clients will send us properties and go, well, this is what I'm seeing on the market. It's always average at the moment. It really is. And, it's what I'm really saying is be patient. There's no rush right here. There's not a hot moving market where you just get in just because you're worried about future price rises. At the moment, it's the opposite, right? And so it's all about waiting and being patient and persistence for quality, which is tough going because, people naturally want to tick things off and transact. When you're pre-approved and you're out there looking, it's tough to be patient. That's what causes FOMO in hot markets, right? And so, it's a bit of a waiting game for most buyers at the moment, which is the best approach. Unless it's a quality asset, you won't be protected if things get worse than they're expected to, right? Like if rates do go past that sort of 5-6%, the properties that are going to struggle are the poorer properties because the higher rates go, the less willing people are to compromise. I'm not going to buy that for that price if I have to pay that interest rate. But I will do that if it's this property and it suits my lifestyle goal and I'm really confident on its performance longer term versus others. And so, it's a real flight to quality, in every asset class. And I think in the last couple of years, the gap between the good assets, the good streets, the best properties in the suburb, and the poorer properties in the poorest streets, that gap really shrunk because buyers who couldn't get into the best streets just went, stuff it. I just want to get into that suburb and I'm just going to go hard at the poorer properties. And there's still competition on that because there's just way too many buyers and not enough properties. And so that gap got tight. But that gap's just going to keep on getting bigger, I feel, the flight to quality.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have heard of properties that are actually better quality properties, perhaps one that doesn't need any work, that are still going above expected prices. So it's not universally that everything's down, right? But it goes back to the type of property and all of those things that are making a big difference.
Look, there buyers, there's demographic need, right? There's, people who are having families, new couples, migrants from pre-COVID that have now got jobs and that have got savings that want to buy, et cetera, right? So there's always a demographic need. There's a house formation rate. You can look at that over the next 10 years, or how many babies are getting born per year. And, they're going to grow up in 20 years' time. So, there is a demographic need that's there. And then you also got a lot of people who are in housing that doesn't suit their lifestyle change, they're, and they don't want to move to the regions, and they're a bit confused around sort of how return to work's going to play out, et cetera. And so absolutely there's buyers there. It's just the buyers right now are going to be very patient and waiting and wanting to sit on their hands until the right property comes on for them. And that's the real chicken and egg, because the people in those properties right now, the good assets, are saying, well, why would I sell right now? I'm not going to get the price I would have got last year. Plus, I can't see anything else on the market that I want. And you get this Mexican standoff, very similar to 2018 and early 2019. It was very obvious the market had come down a lot, and we had lots of clients willing to, upgrade into that market, but very few could find good assets at the start of 2019. On reflection, it was a great time to buy. But the difficulty then was finding the assets, and that's going to be the difficulty in the next, year or two. Higher rates isn't going to, correlate to this huge influx of great property on the market. It's just a fallacy. You're going to get a lot of people willing to rush to the exit on poor properties, but the good assets, people are just going to sit on their hands. And it's the same in the start of COVID. We had clients, coming back from overseas. That's amazing. I'm just going to go be able to buy into the best parts of Sydney and Melbourne and get the best assets because there's going to be this fire sale. And, we were saying, well, the opposite's going to happen. Rates are going to drop. Supply's going to, get really tight, and borrowers are going to go at it because of low rates. And that's obviously what happened. And so, it's a very interesting market at the moment, and the media are loving it. You've got some very respected commentators. Chris Joy, for example, who basically has called it start to finish, over a decade, talking at big price falls. And you've got to look at that as a median. It's probably going to happen because you're going to see the poor assets that got really inflated because of 2% rates are going to have to get repriced to 4% rates and 5% rates and 6% rates. And so, lots going on.
Absolutely. Talk about lots going on. I'm trying to run a show and rub a dog at the same time. It's actually quite complicated. So I apologise if things are a little disjointed, but the reason is I have an extra member of the crew who's very, very interested at the moment in being right in the middle of the shot. So I can't help but allow her to do that. She has me under control. So one of the questions I've got, Chris, the RBA lifted rates today, 50 basis points, right?
Yeah.
And it was pretty much in line with expectations. And now people are saying, well, there are going to be more rate rises, et cetera, et cetera. I'm interested in borrowing power, right? In other words, given a set of income and other assumptions about a particular situation, how much has borrowing power gone down now relative to where the rates were before they started to rise? And what's the impact as the interest rates go further higher? I was talking to somebody today, in fact, the show's going up later this evening, and he suggested that borrowing power on average is reduced by about 15% already.
Yeah. So, for an easy way for your listeners to sort of think about it, your variable rate, which is what banks had to put their buffer on, the variable rate was around 2%. Let's just call it 2 to 2.2%, right? And then the RBA, APRA said you've got to have a 3% buffer on that. So it takes you to 5%. And so all the banks were using an assessment rate around 5%, right? But the problem is right now, the rate the borrowers are getting is, say, 3%. It's probably going to be closer to 3.5% now, right? after this sort of latest 50 basis points. So you got 3.5% now, plus 3% takes you to 6.5%. So the assessment rate has gone from roughly 5% up to 6.5%. And every 1% is about a 10% reduction in borrowing capacity. So we've gone from 5 to 6.5%. That's 1.5%. That's a 15% reduction in borrowing capacity. But that's not taking into consideration things like reduction. And this could be offset by, jumps in income. And this is obviously we're getting a higher worker mobility. You've got massive job vacancies. And you've got a lot of people that are willing to switch jobs. We've had lots of clients switch jobs in the last few months. People going through pre-approvals, people looking to get finance, people going to contracting roles, they're getting offered more money. So assuming no income increases, which the people in the market are usually the ones who are doing well financially, right? Who are getting the income increases. And so you have the confidence to go out and buy, you're usually going to be confident about your income. And so that's usually correlated to, I'm going to get pay rises in the future, right? And so I think that a lot of that borrowing capacity is probably going to be offset by wage increases to a certain extent. But what we're also saying is that borrowing capacities are already falling because people's appetite to take on that debt has reduced. So coming into late 2021, you had the percentage of borrowers borrowing more than 6 times income. That's the percentage of borrowers that are pushing it to the max, right? And so what percentage of that was probably, I got from 1 in 5 to say 1 in 4. And APRA was like, this is not good, and some banks were lending a lot of money to that type of customer. And so 1 in 4 customers were stretching and, 3 in 4 weren't. And so I think that 1 in 4 customer is reducing. And they're having to reduce their borrowing capacities and what they're looking to purchase at. And some are doing it just by choice, a client today, they had an option of buying a house at say 1.3, or we can buy a townhouse at say 900. And they're naturally gravitating towards wanting to buy the townhouse because they're worried about higher rates. We're sort of encouraging them in that situation to go back the other way to get the scarce asset. But that's naturally what buyers are doing. And so, yeah, absolutely. I reckon it's probably 15% down. But that doesn't mean that prices will just fall 15%. It just means that portion of borrowers that were borrowing at their max, they have to reduce their budgets by 15%. And you've also got the psychological, just people reducing their budgets anyway because they don't want to spend as much under higher rates.
Yeah, and you mentioned income going up, but what about the costs side of the equation? Because one of the things I have noticed is that the cost of living are rising considerably, right? And many people are saying, well, the official inflation rate at 5.1% or even non-discretionary at 6.6% is nothing like what I'm experiencing. And I'm not sure that I shared with this you, but this is actually local grocery prices in the Illawarra up 20% in about 3 months, right, from pretty much everywhere, right? So there are huge additional costs. So to what extent is the borrowing power also being crimped by the rising costs, or is that a different set of calculations?
No, HEM's gone up. So, the household expenditure measures that the banks use, they've gone up, and that's probably 3 to 5% higher as well. That's reduced borrowing capacities. And so income's the same. Yep. You've lost, 15% from the increases in interest rates, but you've also maybe lost another 5% from HEM. So maybe you're at 20% now. That's assuming no wage increase, right? And so that's a massive difference. You could have borrowed $1 million and now you can borrow, 800, let's call it. We work at a subset, Martin. Like we did over $300 million of loans last year and our average loan per customer was over 1.5 million, right? So we're dealing in a very small subset market, the family market, the higher income, double income family. That's where we're seeing that we're getting our anecdotes from. We don't play in the markets in the fringes. We don't play in sort of the affordability investment space, etc. And even if our clients are investing, they don't play in those markets. They play in the owner-occupied markets where there is always scarcity. So that's just something for our listeners as well. I do, a little bit biased towards the Sydney clients. Probably 70-80% of our clients are those Sydney couples, and then 10-15% in Brisbane, Melbourne, and so. Yeah, I just want to sort of make sure your listeners understand that as well.
No, that's very, very important, Chris. And as with all these things, there's a lot more sort of below the hood, as it were. But, when you factor all these things in, right, it starts to explain some of the differences that we're seeing. Now, I've got a few questions that I received before the show. This is one I want to throw at you. This is a first-time buyer, right?
Yeah.
This is Jenny, she's called. She's been saving for about 5 years. She's got enough for a deposit of about 12%. Right? She's looking to buy a smallish house on the outskirts of Sydney, not too far out, no more than about 45 minutes to an hour. And basically now she's saying, well, should I go ahead anyway? Prices may come down. I can probably get a mortgage for what I want, but rates are going up. It's getting a bit more difficult. I'm finding I might have to reduce my appetite for what I can afford because, prices are going one way and my availability to borrow is going the other way. But she's still saying, maybe I should still just pull the trigger. And I don't give advice. So she posed the question to you to say, how would you think about it if she were in that situation? Now, what are the questions that she should be asking herself about whether she should pull the trigger or whether she'd wait?
Look, is Jenny got a partner or is it just Jenny?
Solo.
Look, it's difficult, right? We do help some single clients, but you've got to put yourself. I was a financial advisor for a long time, right? And so what I'm thinking through, what's going to be the next best move after that, and how's that your decision today going to link into the next decision, and ultimately going to get you further ahead. And it's one of the challenges when you are single, and this is not to say you should never do anything when you're single, is that your life plan can change dramatically quite quickly when you do have a partner. You can go from one income to two incomes. You've got two savings. You've got the ability to service a mortgage. Your borrowing capacity will shift. Your needs will shift. You've got clarity on where you might want to live and, have a family, etc. And so, one thing's great, Jenny wanting to do something for her future. It's just that you want to make sure that is the thing that you are going to really want in the future, right? And it's something that's really, so she wants to get a house because she wants to live in it longer term. Okay, then that's great. She's thought that through. Maybe she does have a partner and she does want kids. Not saying everyone wants that, but that could also give her, a lifestyle result, I guess, fulfill that. Plus, it could be a good investment. Now, the issue is that let's say she wants to get into the market. I assume she's going to be spending less than 1.5 million, right? So obviously the state government have made some changes with stamp duty potentially, as long as it goes through legislation. And, the second half of this year and next year, you aren't going to need stamp duty. And that is absolutely going to create a lot more demand in the housing market from first home buyers. The deposit you needed, the current rules are up to 650 to 800,000, right? You can't get an asset in Sydney at that price. So the current rules didn't benefit first home buyers really on any major level. But this rule absolutely does, because 1.5, includes a lot of the great unit markets, but it also includes some of the housing markets as well. And so, the deposit people needed, let's say they wanted to buy at 1.3, was 10%, 130 plus 5% for stamp duty. So almost $200,000. Now it's only 130, right? And if a first home buyer or a young couple had 100,000, and then they find out they only need 130, what are they going to do? They're going to scramble. They're going to figure out, how do I bridge that gap? Because it's only 30 grand. I'm going to ask family, and family are going to get in their ears. And so what you're absolutely going to do is create a lot of demand. And so that's one thing for Jenny, is knowing that, maybe the opportunity is, pre that, is to get ahead of that because she's got the deposit. But she said she's only got a 12% deposit. I'm not sure if that's plus stamp duty, because if it's only 12%, she's going to pay massive LMI potentially, depending on her job and, et cetera. It's going to be pretty tight. So, but Jenny, it also comes down to, looking in those markets, what's happening? Are you seeing a glut of housing on the market? Is days on market sort of really exploding? Are listings, are the quality assets still sitting there? If all these signs are there, then there's no time pressure, right? Then just sit on your hands. It's not till you start to see that real pressure cooker effect. And how many people are going to open homes? And how many people are going to the auctions? And if anything like that. So if I was Jenny, I'd be sitting on my hand until I actually, could get into the better parts of any suburb, into the better streets and the better size of that streets and the best properties in that suburb, and be tracking those. And that's the only ones I would be buying anyway. I wouldn't be buying those, being an opportunistic buyer of poor assets. You can do that, but you can only do that when it's real distress. So, the height of 2018 or 2019 downturn, absolutely there was an opportunity to buy the worst properties in the best suburbs. Some of those actually got the best growth if you ended up selling in the 2021 boom, you could have made more money on poor assets than you could have on good assets in that short time frame. But that's definitely not the market we're in now, I would say. So it hasn't actually, this hasn't played out enough to gamble on poor assets and try to flip them. And so absolutely, that's what I would say to Jenny. Really think through your longer term lifestyle need and what you really want. Because the issue with Jenny, if she then in 3 years' time says, look, you know what, I want to move to Melbourne, or you know what, I've got this job opportunity in London, or whatever it is, and she's just got this house and she's paid stamp duty, and then she might want to sell it and pay selling costs. It could just literally be a whole waste of time, especially if prices do fall. You've got potentially up to 10% of transaction costs. And then you've got the stress of trying to sell it. It's not that easy to unwind property decisions. That's what we see. So people go in there and they go, oh, no, it's not actually working. I shouldn't have bought that. Then it's a stress. It's easy to buy, but it's hard to sell and it's super stressful. And you don't want to lose money and you get this loss aversion and you feel like you've made a big mistake and you stress about it and you lose sleep. It's really, painful to unwind property decisions versus, you can just sell out of the share market, in a minute.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I went back and said, "What's your time frame?" Right, and that wasn't the question that she'd thought about, which I thought was very interesting, right? Because I'm not sure that people actually think about, well, as you say, transaction costs 10% or whatever it is. That means that you've got to be thinking 5 to 10 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Not 1 to 2
and even
years,
in these,
right?
Yeah, in these markets, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're now, you want to be thinking really, long time. You don't want to be saying what's going to make money in the next 2 or 3 years. Absolutely, because the risk of that going wrong is way more than probably getting it right because of the transaction costs.
Yeah.
And so, if Jenny's thinking 3 years, absolutely. You need much longer time frames. That's why I always say, you want to match it up to your longer term lifestyle need, because this client, for example, this morning, they're wanting to buy this townhouse. And I'm like, what's the runway realistically for this? And they're like, 3-4 years and, the kids and stuff like that. So look, then you're going to get yourself straight back to the same position you're in now. You're frustrated there's not enough good houses on the market. They are likely to hold their value more because there's not many on the market. And in 3 or 4 years' time, that's what you want to go and buy. And then you've got an asset. There is actually quite a lot of those in that market. And then you've got to pay transaction costs. And so the runway is a really good question, Martin. So I agree with you.
Yeah, it's one of those that people sometimes don't think about, right? The other thing I asked her was, how good is your cash flows? I mean, not, what your cash flows are. Do you know what your cash flow is, right? So do you know what your likely future cash flow will be once you bought the property? So, for example, have you included things like costs of maintenance, costs of the council tax, the local authority tax, those sorts of things, the insurance. Because
I think buyers are already doing it with the interest rates. The biggest cost rates, right? I mean, you can go insurance and things like that. I mean, it adds up, absolutely, especially if you buy, it's a big risk when you're buying a property if you don't do a building and pest, right? I just think it's crazy. People take the ones from the real estate agent or they don't do it at all. And, that's potentially opening yourself up to massive costs. It could be sunk costs, just fixing things that are going to add zero money, but you're going to have to fund them. Otherwise, things with the roof or the footings or whatever, right? And so absolutely people be way too optimistic when they buy a property and don't do a great building and pest and don't think that through. And so that could be a big issue for Jenny here is, absolutely. She just doesn't do that. She gets all these costs. She starts to wipe out her cash flow. She gets really stressed. And then she has to sell in 2 years' time, and then she crystallizes a big loss. Absolutely, all buyers are already coming to us, and when we're doing a pre-approval, we're saying, look, current rates of X is this, but if rates go to 4 or rates go to 4.5 or rates go to 5, this is how much your repayments will be. And I think all the buyers out in the marketplace are doing that today. You'd have to be pretty not switching on or reading any news, and no buyer's doing that, right? When you're making your biggest financial decisions, you're not being aware of what's happening to rates, right? So I think buyers are already, so a lot of the 4 or 5% is getting priced into prices already. The borrowing capacity reductions isn't getting priced in, but I do think it is in some extent because people are reducing their budgets already. And so, yeah.
And again, I have to underscore, it's not a simple decision, right? And that never is, unfortunately, with these big decisions. So that's why it's worth just taking the time to unpick it. Now, Matt actually asked this question a couple of times, and I'll put it up now. So, Chris, he's talking about median house prices in Vancouver, which is down about 25% in 3 months. Our property market is often compared as being similar to Canada's because we're commodity-based as well. So I suppose the implicit question in his mind is it likely that we might see falls of similar amounts in some areas of the market in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, you can compare across countries and across property markets, but and you could say that one's more like that one, etc. Absolutely, and you're going to see that, the danger of getting wrapped up in this first level thinking, and this is nothing against Matt, but in median prices, firstly, or what's happening in the Australian property market. What are you doing, Matt? Like, where are you buying? What's your situation? What's your savings? Like, what's your plan longer term? Right, that market may not be falling 25%. And you might, if you want to go and buy a high-rise apartment, or you want to buy in a house and land package, or you want to buy a townhouse in the outer suburbs, or you want to buy a busy road in the middle and outer rings, etc. Absolutely, you could see these price falls, but and you will also see medians fall because a bigger percentage of poorer properties are going to sell. If you're in a good asset right now in the best streets, you sit. I was chatting to an agent earlier this week, and we were having this discussion. He's saying, look, I can get the poorer stuff. I can get listings there. I can find buyers that are willing to just cash in and get out because they know they're not great assets and they know they're going to take a long time to recover. But if I go and try to get the best properties in the suburb right now, everyone just says, I'm just going to stay here. And so medians are going to fall just because the percentage of transactions are going to be on a smaller number as well. So there is also you're going to see a big price median falls because you're going to go off at a top in 2021, which is the froth of FOMO last year. That's already gone. We're already seeing in the premium markets in Sydney, that's 10, 15% has already gone. But you're saying that's off the peak in 2021 when a small number of transactions on low listings and people going gung-ho, that's the top, and that's real falls. Well, it's only for the people who transacted, that small number of people who are experiencing those falls. Everyone else, well, it's just really a potential price. And so, I think you're going to see big reductions in medians if you're going to go off the top of the market from last year, because some of those prices were huge and there's a small number of properties that transacted, and some markets are going to get absolutely smashed by more than 25, but some markets will hold their value. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's worth just saying that the Vancouver situation with money laundering is one of the most significant levers there. We know there's money laundering in Australia as well. They haven't passed legislation. They should have about 20-odd years ago, and that's another factor that's playing out too. Tony Lecantro, good to see you in the chat. Thanks for the super chat. And his 6 top in order for a housing correction: Vancouver, Sydney, Auckland, Toronto, Melbourne, and Budapest. Eva and everyone, and Cookie. And Tony is on next week. So it's a precursor to Tony Lecantro's show next week, which I think will be a very interesting conversation more broadly about the whole investment environment. So thanks for the super chat, Chris, and great to see you on the show tonight. And I'm sure people will be throwing you questions ahead of time as well as on the show next week. So thanks for that. Okay.
I mean, I guess that's with the housing crash as well. It's like if you want to draw a line back and say, the price was this, and then prices have fallen 25%. You could be right, it's finally fallen 25%, but has that fallen 25% from when you first started saying things are going to crash? And the reality is it might have fallen 25% from the top of last year, which may just wiped out the growth of 2021. And so I think people get very excited about the idea of this housing crash and correction. But all you're basically saying is a small subset of the market is getting repriced based
back to where it was.
Those properties that sold in 2021 are now actually a bit cheaper.
Yeah.
And it's just like the property porn. I'm obsessed with the story of housing prices crash. But then when you actually look at it on an individual basis, what does it really mean? What does it really mean? Well, it means those buyers who bought in 2021 are experiencing a bit of financial pain, but only if they bought after, say, April, because that's when prices went down. So it's those small buyers, and it's only which ones of those actually are feeling a lot more pain than others. And so I think that the numbers sound huge, but it's all artificial, right? It's not like the housing market's worth $10 trillion, but $2 trillion of debt. Well, it's $8 trillion of net equity there that maybe drops to 7 or 6. It's big numbers, but you got to wipe off the growth of the last few years.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly right. And I guess the other point there is that I always say to people, you only need one person to buy the property right later. So actually what the value is always an interesting question, right? Because there are still some properties that are selling for considerably higher than you might expect as well. So that's another factor just to bear in mind. Is your property that you're looking at one which could actually attract another buyer later? Right? Because quite often, some of them that you buy, you think, oh, hang on, I like it, but what about other people? Will they like it too?
Absolutely. So we're always looking at the negatives. So clients will send us properties, which they did today, and one on the beaches, for example, he sent us a couple. I said, oh, what do you think of this property? And it's like, well, it's a triangle block, right? It's not a great block. And, you got half your backyard here, half your backyard there, and, your kid runs over that side. How are you going to see them, right, et cetera? So absolutely, you've always got to think, well, what doesn't suit me, but what are most buyers going to want? What are most buyers not going to like about this? What compromises are they not going to want to make, In a hot market, they make massive compromises. It's got stairs, it's dark, it's south-facing. I just want to get in cold markets. They say, well, I'm just going to keep waiting. I do like the house, actually. It's a nice house, but I don't like the street. Or, it is quite dark, et cetera. So you've really got to understand what are the compromises that anyone's going to make buying the property and try to minimize those as much as possible. It is a big problem that people get themselves into. It doesn't matter if it's a good investment, I'm going to live in it, etc. Well, absolutely, no, you are going to live in it, and then you're going to try to sell it one day. And then when you go and sell it, then it's going to matter. And that's going to be potentially 5 or 10 or 15 years down the line. And then you're going to realize the opportunity cost that of buying something that you wanted to live in really is, because you would have actually wanted to live in a great asset. That's the thing. You could have the best of both worlds. Live in a great property that's great to live in, plus get a great investment. If you were just a bit more patient, or you're a bit more picky. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's a very important and tricky way up, I guess. Ray asked this question: what does Chris think about issues around building and mortgages when building costs are more and take longer, meaning the more costs before occupancy, which of course is a big issue at the moment with builders falling over and with supply chains disrupting the cost of materials like steel being double and of course labour costs much higher?
So we've definitely seen some big issues. We've seen clients who are trying to do builds not even be able to get contracts, get cost plus contracts, can't get fixed price contracts. We've seen clients with fixed price contracts that are builders are saying, I don't want to do the work anymore, and have walked away from jobs. We've seen a lot of our clients who are thinking about builds really struggle. Like even one today, they were going to do a build. They've got architect plans. They've lodged their DA, but a property's come on that's a finished product. And it's just it feels like a safer bet. So they don't want to do the build. They're just going to upgrade. And so, yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is going to probably play out over time. A lot of people will put their build plans on hold. But a lot of people are going to have to renovate. They do want to renovate. It's just they don't want to pay these exorbitant prices, and they really get stuck living in homes that they don't really want to live in, but they don't want to upgrade because the jump in terms of the debt plus stamp duty and selling costs is big. But I do think so. I mean, yeah, we don't do too much in the house and land packages at all, really. But I think you're already going to see the counter-cyclical developers start to do land banking right now. I mean, I was just looking at one last week, a massive one in the inner Sydney. About $200 million they paid for the lands around Erskineville. I think it's a couple of thousand apartments that they're sort of land banking. You've seen a lot of the big developers land bank, farms on the fringes of capital cities, and so I think they're confident that the long-term demand's there. But yeah, we're experiencing it more on our clients doing builds and the ones that are trying to get fixed price contracts and can't in the capital cities. And if they do get it, then they're exorbitant. We had one that was a $1.1 million build. They got another quote and it was 1.7. So it completely blew out their whole plan. And they're going to have issues with valuations because last year they didn't have, even if you spent a bit of money on a build, the val come to get the construction loan was still coming in really good. But this year, the vals are coming in a bit much lower, especially in the last sort of couple of months. That's an interesting one as well. You had last year we had a lot of our clients who had, got quite significant growth on their properties. You only had to own a semi-decent asset and the prices went up a lot. And a lot of our clients actually locked in those growths. So they went and got equity loans up to 80%. They put the money in offset accounts. We had a lot of clients in sort of banking, et cetera. And, knowing that if markets do cool off, A, they're not going to be able to borrow that money again because of the VAL, but B, it's going to be much harder because banks are going to get restrictive around cash out. And C, it sometimes takes time, to actually go and get that money if you want to invest it into the markets, et cetera. And so, VAL's becoming an issue for cash out as well, plus banks are getting tightened up.
Yeah, very interesting. And, the challenge with trying to work out what the price will really be, I was talking to somebody today who's actually got a, in theory, fixed price package, homeland package, right? But now they've come back and have put the price up. And it's not in Queensland. In Queensland, they've ruled you can't do it. But in New South Wales, evidently you can for this particular one. So they're now looking at how they're going to find an extra $50,000 to $60,000 that they didn't know they needed.
Look, it's the only option for a builder. I'm going to probably put myself in the builder's shoes here and say, it's great if you had this. Do you really want the property to be built? Yep. Okay. Do you want the builder to go bust? No. Okay. Well, then the builder's not going to do all this work and lose money, right? And so otherwise you're going to see builders go bust. And then they potentially doesn't put anyone in a good position. So I think it is going to have to get renegotiated, a lot of these contracts, because there's no argument. Materials have gone through the roof and wages and getting staff's difficult, right? And then you got all the issues with, rain delays and all these sort of things. And so, I feel for the builders at the moment, the developers in this space, because they have been running on tight margins. A lot of them bought work at the start of 2020 and 2021. Maybe they shouldn't have, right? Maybe they shouldn't have, just try to buy work as much as they did. But they were very fearful, like lots of other businesses. And it's really backfired on them and, sending them under. So it's a very touchy subject for a lot of builders at the moment.
Well, it's a profits boom, isn't it, for a lot of them? So they're just very, very busy and not making any money. So, but obviously the other side of it is, well, you did your sums on one set of assumptions and suddenly the assumptions have changed. The banks are now less willing to up the mortgage that they might have made because the things we discussed earlier on.
Yeah.
So people are getting caught, and unfortunately with longer timeframes as well, they've also got longer expenses than they expected through the build process. So it's not a very comfortable situation for any of those parties, unfortunately.
Yeah, we get the clients come to us after they hear about us some way, and then we had this client last week, and he's got a house in Sydney, and he's gone to one guy, and he's broker, and then they've sent him to another property guy. Next, he's got these 2 house and land packages, in the outskirts of Newcastle. I grew up in Newcastle, I know it well, and one's near Cessnock and one's near Maitland, and they're new land subdivisions. They're both taken ages to get released. He's paid deposits down on them both. So he hasn't got the land yet, but he's committed, right? He's got a contract and he's paid a deposit, and he's just having to sit on this decision. He's trying to get out of it. He can't. And it's super stressful. So you got investors who have unfortunately been taken down that path by spruikers as well, who are feeling with this pain as much as, maybe not as much as first home buyers, but absolutely they exist as well.
And they call me Bruce, likes the doggy. Well, yeah, I'm glad. It's all part of the scenery here, the old dog. She comes up, goes down, and she's got the idea now that she gets more attention. She comes and makes a fuss rather than goes and sit on the mat. So very good. Now, Chris, I've got this question from earlier on. This is from Pete. So he owns 2 high-rise apartments in a block in North Ryde. Okay, he bought them in 2017. Okay, 2 investment properties. He's looked at the situation where the value is now no higher than it was back in 2017, so no capital growth. Right? One of them is full. One is with a rental client, but not great rent. The other one's empty, and he's not actually reletting it. And it's the big dilemma for a property investor, right? Do they cut their losses? How does he unpick that in the current situation?
Look, it's a bit of an obvious one, right? Like, why hasn't it gone up? Well, he did buy in the boom. We've got clients in this situation. Client came to me years ago, and they had bought a place in Ryde, and they came to me and they bought it off the plan. I said, look, you guys need to get out of this. This is not going to end well. They paid $870 for it. I said, look, do everything you can to get out of the contract. And the problem is a lot of the contracts are watertight and they don't allow sales pre-settlement. But sometimes you can get out. We have had clients on-sell them, especially when they've been spruiked it through a company. And, they threaten that they're going to, do a bit of bad review, etc. So, but yeah, let's say that in this situation, the client's val came in at 780. They bought it for 870. They ended up having a guarantor loan through families, and they lost all their savings. And their loan is still bigger than what they paid, than what it's worth. They're stuck. They've got 2 kids there. They're now in this apartment. They want to upgrade, but they can't save. They can't save fast enough to get out of the negative equity. And so they're stuck. And so they'd love to sell. This is one of the things that don't get talked about. Like, they would love to get out of there. They know it's not a great investment. They don't want to be there. But they can't sell because they're stuck. They're sort of prisoner in the house. If they sell, they crystallize their loss. And so while we've got North Ryde right now, 770 places for sale. So when you need days on market to be pretty tight. You need stock levels to be pretty tight. You need buyers to be very optimistic, and to be taking on bigger loans. There's no supply shortage. So what was his name?
Pete.
Pete. It's not going to get any better. And it wasn't, and just wishful thinking that you're going to get this supply shortage. They're actually building more apartments in North Ryde right now, that are newer and better than yours. And yours is 5 years old right now. The building trends shift so fast. People didn't care about sustainability 5 years ago, but now they do want that, right? And new buyers, why would they buy your apartment when they could buy something new off the plan for the same price and live in a freshly painted new apartment, right? So things aren't going to get better from a supply point of view, but also going to get better from a demand point of view. Buyers have changed their preferences. Investors aren't going to go anywhere near high rise anymore. We've all heard the Opal Towers and the high rise issues are quite prolific out there. So they're not buying those anymore. First time buyers don't want to buy these apartments because they want to buy other things. They just don't need to. And so, yeah, absolutely. You got to cut your losses and run. But so what would you do? What's the benefit of doing so? Well, you would free up borrowing capacity. You would potentially free up cash flow because you're probably running a negative cash flow. You said Warrens can't get a tenant, for example. And then you go, what would I use that extra? Would I pay off my home loan? Do I put into shares? Do I do other investing? Do I just sit on my hands for a bit? You got to be factoring in the opportunity cost of not making a decision rather than, I guess, fixate on what you paid for it back in 2017 and whether you made money or lost money. Because you can't, it doesn't really matter what you paid. It doesn't matter whether you bought in 2017, 2018, 2019. All that matters is what it's worth today and what can you sell it for. And no one really cares about what you paid for it. They don't factor that into what they're going to pay today. And so absolutely, it's never a real good scenario in this situation. All I can say is if you are going to sell it, be very careful how you play it. Because if you stuff it up, the property becomes stale, you damage your digital real estate, your property gets a bad smell, and you'll find it even harder to sell. So you get one crack at it. So get your tenant out, tidy absolutely everything up with the property. Don't get lazy because don't feel like I've already lost money. I don't want to sink any more money into it. No, this is your time to actually make sure it's pristine. You get the best agent. You go over the top on styling, and you have a crack at it and you run really hard, really fast, and you try to sell it, and you don't get greedy. And if you get a good offer, you get that agent to tie down that buyer, and you make sure it happens. Because if it doesn't, and it's on the market for 8 weeks, then your chance of selling it and your chance of even selling it in a year or two time really is much lower. Because when someone comes to buy, they go, why didn't it sell? You can see it on the RP data. It was on the market for 90 days. Why didn't it sell? So yeah, just got to be really careful. You want to get out of it. Don't just rush and sell it. You've got to really plan it. You've got to pick the time to sell. It's a real stress.
And one of the things I didn't tell you, but I will tell you now, was that when he bought, he was halfway up the building and he had quite good views out. And then they built another block literally just over there, right? So suddenly the view that you've now got is of another high rise just over there, right? And what he said was, I didn't do my homework on the way in. He now recognizes he didn't do his homework, right? He didn't think about how is this development going to play out? What else is going to be built, right? Because that is, for me, the point. It's very hard to extract yourself out because if you make mistakes on the way in, those mistakes stay with you, don't they?
Absolutely. And this isn't just high rise. So this can happen in, clients today and they're buying this house and land package. I'm like, yeah, it's great. You've got this view and it's this big, but you can see on a satellite that that's all going to be houses. So picture this in 10 years' time. This is another 2,000 or 3,000 houses around you. It's not farmland. It's not going to be nice and quiet around here, which you think it is. Same in new townhouses. You think, oh, it's this nice new townhouse. Well, you know what? Do a DA search and see what everyone else is doing and what other so you're going to come back in 10 years' time. This is all going to be duplexes. It's not going to be townhouses. Yep. And yours is actually going to be one of the older townhouses in this area. And so this happens not just in high rise. It happens in townhouses. It happens in housing and land packages. It also happens at the premium end of the market in good houses. What you really want to do is go around and look at your neighbours. What are your neighbours potentially going to do? What can they do? Is it other houses? How could your privacy be compromised? What's going to happen with noise? Is that you backing onto a main road? Is that going to get rezoned to high density and R3? Potentially, And so absolutely, a lot of people don't forward think how a suburb could change and how their property could be affected. But, it's not to say all development's bad, but you obviously don't want to buy something that's going to get looked frowned, or it's not going to be as attractive after this development happens. Because, you could actually, if your house is a little bit further away from where the high street's all getting renovated and new shops are coming in and cafes, and you're walking distance, but you're not getting any affected on a daily basis, the suburb could benefit from that development. And so, it's not to say no, you don't want to see any development, but you also want to see the right balance for that property.
You need to know what the forward plan is. I think that's the key point. And, it's quite interesting. As you say, it's not just high rise, it's low rise as well that you could get built out. Your view could disappear. One of the reasons I bought up a hill was that I was totally confident that even though built down the road, I'm never going to lose the view. Jason, thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Very common for a view to go when overbuilt and worth a lot less. Absolutely, that's exactly what we're talking about. And people need to think through some of those things. Again, it's not a simple process of buying a property, unfortunately. It's really, really quite difficult. Now, let's go on, Chris. This next one, well, interesting conundrum. So this is a family house. It's been in the family for about 40 years. It hasn't been updated in that time. It's on the outskirts of Sydney to the south in Sutherland. It's got a reasonably large plot. And the question is, it's time now to dispose of it because essentially the people are very elderly and they're going to need to go into care. And so the rest of the family is trying to work out what to do. But the dilemma they've got is, do they try and sell it as its current state, right? Do they try and get planning for subdivision? Does that add value? Or do they try and do it up before they actually do something? And they're sort of stuck in this, which do I do? Do I just do the minimum and just get rid of it? Trying to maximise the value is the critical question. So the question is, when you've got an older property on a large plot with some potential, how do you maximise the value?
Look, if it's a pretty straightforward subdivision, then it should be pretty straightforward for the person buying it, right? So I don't think you're going to add much value. Where you're going to add value is if you get a subdivision through or a build through that's actually really difficult to do. We had a client do it in the northern suburbs of Sydney, right? Battled out for years trying to split up a block. It was a big block in the upper north and get it subdivided. And went through the environment court, battled. Doesn't live there anymore because all the neighbours and the neighbourhood hates him. But the reality is he got it through and he made a lot of money, right? Because it was difficult, and no one else could get it through. But he knew his rules and he knew how to play it and he fought it and he did the legal costs and he won, right? That's absolutely going to add value. But if you're just doing a standard subdivision, there's probably no point, right? Going through all that and the stress and the time. Adding value to spending money on it. Well, what's someone going to do with it? They're going to knock it down? Well, why would you spend any money on it? Leave it as is. Even more worse it looks, the better. It makes the person feel better that they're going to knock it down. So definitely don't spend any money on it if they're going to knock it down. Is someone going to renovate it? Well, if they are potentially going to renovate it, maybe making it more livable for the short term is a really good idea in this market. Because the reality is, a lot of people can't, especially first-time buyers, can't afford to do the renovation today. But they want the place that's got renovation potential, but they need to be able to live in it for the next, 3 to 5 years with their young kids. And so, painting it and tidying up the kitchen and making sure, there's no major costs that they have to go in. Absolutely, would probably get more first-time buyers interested, create more demand, etc. So it really comes down to that. The agents in the area probably want you to make it the more stable asset. So you just got to be careful a little bit. They're going to want to tell you to do things that may or may not have to do. So you do have to maybe temper them a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, they
that was the problem because they actually got some advice from a couple of agents, and they were saying, "Do this." You know, a lot of expense, a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Right, and they were sort of questioning whether this actually made much sense or not.
Yeah, exactly. And so you got to be careful with that, right? You got to be careful just blindly following the agent. The agent doesn't mind if you spend 50 grand on it. A, it increases the sale price. They make more money on the comm, and B, it's easier for them to sell. Yeah. And so you've got to really be careful, and you just got to be really smart with it, you know, and think that through. Who's ultimately your buyer, and what are they going to do to it? And you know. And if it is someone who's going to live in it and renovate it, I actually think you're probably better off to do those things, because for you, it might be 20, 30 grand that they can then borrow 80% on. So for them, it's only an extra 6 grand. If they pay an extra 30, you spend 30 and they pay extra 30. Well, they only have to pay 6 because they borrow 80% of that from the bank. And so, and they probably can't afford to buy it plus spend 30 grand on it. And so for them, they're going to look at it and go, well, we need to spend 30 grand on it from day zero. We haven't got enough money for that. So you lose buyers. And so, that sort of would be my advice there, within reason.
Yeah, no, that I think makes a lot of sense. Certainly, my immediate reaction was be careful, because you can end up throwing a lot of money in the wrong places, right? On a scheme that may not actually pay back, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, I remember we were going to buy a few years ago in Melbourne, and I was in love with it, right? And it looked presented really well, and it was a good street. It was really good, family home for us in the future, and I thought, well, this is great. And we did a building and pest on it, and there was issues absolutely everywhere, in the roof and the floor and the walls. And you couldn't tell when you were there. And so, it's one of the things, you definitely want to make sure it looks good to present. But if it's got lots and lots of problems with them, then there's no point even trying to fix them, because, you're just, unfortunately, you might even find buyers. That's the thing with the property market, right? It is buyer beware. And, it's completely unregulated. And so you just got to be, know that a lot of buyers won't do their due diligence. And that's the reality.
Exactly right. No, very good. Are you up for another question? I hope you don't mind. These are just one ones.
Fire them away.
Okay, all right. Okay, this is somebody living over in Perth, right? They're in one of these new estates to the north of Perth, actually.
Yep.
It's not really gone up in value much since they bought it. Okay, it's one of these on a relatively small plot, about 300 squares. And they are now really out of space. Right? So the question they're trying to figure out is, do they try and buy the one next door and sort of knock through, right, because it's on the market? Or do they actually try and sell and go and find somewhere else? Bearing in mind that there's been no real capital value in this area over the last few years. But they need more space.
Right. So they buy the neighbour and they can knock it through. And they put it like as a semi or something, is it? Or
well, it says they're both standalone properties, but potentially
so create a tunnel or something
correct.
In the middle. Or
yeah.
Little that'll be pretty sexy property to sell in 10 years' time, won't it? 2 houses with a bit of a tunnel in the middle. I think we can rule out that option just for the obvious, right? And you do get people who are wanting to combine apartments together and semis, and we've had clients do it with semis. I think that can potentially work for some people, especially if they're not renovated and they can go up together and they can keep it balanced. Apartments are a little bit more difficult with front doors and walls and all that sort of stuff. But 2 standalone houses next to each other, don't do that. I mean, the reality is, if you're on a small block in the outer suburbs and you bought that in the boom of when Perth is doing quite well, right? Because of hasn't done much for a long time, low rates, and I'm not saying it's going to do well in the next 12 months, but it has done well in the last 12 months in some suburbs. But that's going to take years of strong growth before it filters out and it starts to create that marketplace that you purchased in, let alone if more developers release more lands, that are trying to make more money. So like those other situations in North Ryde, etc., don't expect things to get better in the short term. And if they didn't go up under 2% rates, how's it going to go up under 5% rates? And you could be in for tougher times. It's not to say, things could be bad today, they could be worse tomorrow. And so, the reality is, though, you get this mortgage prisoner, you also get a house prisoner in this situation. If they sell, they crystallize their loss, they've got no deposit for the next place. And then, and they can't afford to buy anything. And so you're stuck, right? And it's hard to rent.
Yep.
And so, you basically get stuck, and so you have to live where you are. And so that's the reality. This is some of the social consequences of people when they make a property decision, eyes wide closed, I guess, and they get spooked it by house and land packages, by, off the plan.
Yep.
These are real lives that get affected years down and create massive social problems and family issues and all these sort of things that pop out. It's why I'm so passionate about, trying to stop people going down this route. Because, we see all those problems years down the line when they come to us and say, I did that decision, I regret it, I've lost sleep over it, and especially when one part of the family does the financial decision and they make a big mistake, it's hard to move on, right? The other person, especially if you're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe you're only earning $50,000 or $60,000 a year after tax, your willingness to work starts to drop, doesn't it, right? When you've just lost 200 grand on a bad property decision. And so, yeah, bit of a rant.
And the sort of but the point I want to come to, again, it's another example. If you make the wrong decision on day one, and then you try and retrofit later a solution that's suboptimal, you actually ending up digging a bigger hole for yourself, right? So that's why it's so important to make the right decisions the first time around.
Look, my favourite saying in property though is it should be hard to buy. Right? If it's easy to buy, that's glaring obvious. It's probably going to be hard to sell. And do you want to do the pain today, which isn't that painful, really? It's just being patient and being persistent to then potentially make it really easy to sell. And in any market, to be honest. So if you've got a really quality asset right now and you put on the market, you might not get the same competition as you would have got in 2021, but you will absolutely still get people who have been waiting to get into that street, who have wanted to be on that side of the street, has actually want your property, who were going to potentially, and then you also get the buyers that are in the market, like the seagull effect, will all flock to your one property because it's obvious. It's there's no properties in that pocket of the suburb, and it's renovated, it's perfect, and it really ticks all the boxes, and there's no compromises, and it'll sell well in this market. You may not get the absolute optimal price because you need real competition for that. You need 6 people bidding at an auction, right? To create that frenzy, and 2 people going hammer and tong at it and, pushing it way above because there's missed out at multiple auctions and they just have to get in. Like that market isn't always, but you will still get potentially competition in these type of markets. I mean, we upgraded our home last month, right? Pre-rate rises. It was one of the best properties in the suburb, right? Came on, knew it was off market. We know in any other market, we're not going to have a chance to buy that property because we're going to have to compete at auction with it with 10 other buyers. But in this market, we know that we've got a motivated vendor that, wants to get out and that wants to take a good, a fair price. And you can buy that under zero competition because we know they're not just going to, say no to a good offer. And we know that in this, coming market, that very little properties in this street or this side of the street transact at any market over any decade. The transaction rate in that street is so low that even over the next 5 years, there's probably still only going to be 3 properties transacting on that side of the street. And that property side of the street is actually transaction rate's going to fall because everyone's just going to sit on their hands. And so this is just the thing to understand when you're buying is that, and this is what we're seeing with a lot of buyers at the moment. Like a lot of people think, good time to buy. Well, if you're actually upgrading, this is actually the perfect time to buy. Last year was a horrible year to upgrade. You had to pay a lot of money. You had to pay over the odds to get into the market because that's what price rises are. It's someone paying more than the other person. That last week didn't seem to be a good price, but now it is. And at some point that's overs and it slows down. But in this market, you can actually buy quality assets because you've got vendors that are motivated to sell and they're also not being greedy and they don't want to just run it to auction. So you've got the perfect seller if you can find them, and that's the hard thing. But also you've got buyers that are nervous, buyers that are, not willing to non-committal. And so if you could be the buyer that makes a strong offer, knowing that it's a quality asset, and a seller that's just willing to take a fair price, you can actually make an upgrade happen. But last year it was really hard because you had to go to auction and pay overs, and you had heaps of competition. You had zero control. And so we actually think that this not this next 6 months potentially, but at some point though, the sentiment shifts, and buyers start saying, you know what, I'm going to get on with things. Rates are only going to stabilize around this point. We've got a demographic need. We can afford it. We're doing well financially. We really just want to. And then all of a sudden, you start to see some support to the marketplace, and then you start to see buyers start buying, a bit of competition, and then more buyers will come in. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow, but at some point, peak fear goes, and we start moving into another cycle. Now, it's not expecting rates of growth to be anywhere near like they are in the last 30 years, right? Those sort of tailwinds aren't there. But that's not to say that there's still not going to be growth, because you're still going to potentially see scarcity, income growth in certain suburbs, and competition, and the wealth effect and capitalism and all these sort of things. And so hopefully that answers the question a bit more broadly.
Absolutely. No, it's good. Now, here's one from, there you go, on the floods. So how many houses in Sydney are longer saleable due to the floods? And it's a broader question, I think, too. We've built on floodplains for years, right? And now we're really coming home to roost. And I guess the question is, once you've been flooded out 2, 3 or 4 times, do you cut your losses? Can you cut your losses? What does this tell us about the trajectory of prices and properties in those flood-prone areas?
So, are people going to be a bit more nervous around floods or fires, when they've in recent memory? Absolutely. And so people are going to want to buy in these areas at the same price when there's a fear that this could happen. And let alone is there going to potentially, be less properties that are available for sale, people, tradies, all these sort of things. So, yeah, absolutely. All you're really basically saying is there's less properties that potentially could, or less farms that could get cut up for house and land packages. And so you're going to see a supply restriction, and less release of land, which could potentially be better for some of the properties that are still out there that aren't in flood zones. And so, yeah, it's interesting, right? So in Brisbane, right, like you would say that the areas that are flooding, right, now they're less desirable. So what happens is buyers don't want to buy in those suburbs. The buyers shift to the suburbs that aren't going to flood.
Yep.
And people in those suburbs are less likely to leave, so less listings happen. But you create more competition. So the seesaw shifts, and all of a sudden you've got high prices in suburbs that aren't flooding, right? And so, yeah, this is the problem with these things, is they do shift buyers, and they also shift sellers, where people are less willing to move to certain suburbs.
Yeah, I did a show a few weeks ago on Brisbane specifically, and we looked specifically at the flooding and what happened to the prices in the flood areas versus the others. And exactly that happened. It moved the, it's like jelly. It moved it, it sort of slid over there and it went up there and down there. So it's a very, very complicated situation. Now, next thing I want to talk about is refinancing, right? So there's a whole story to tell about refinancing at the moment, not least because, of course, we've got some people on fixed rates that are going to have to deal with a significantly higher fixed rate coming up. We've got people on the mix of fixed and variable. We've got people on variable rates that aren't necessarily in the best rates. What's the story on refinancing that you're seeing at the moment, Chris?
So there was a huge amount of refinance happened in the last, 2-3 years. And a lot of people actually, if they didn't refinance, they just fixed at their current lender, because all the banks in COVID, they all offered payment holidays, but they also then some type of price fixing event happened, and they all offered exactly the same fixed rates. And so there was no, within like 5-10 basis points and, small differences at some banks, but pretty much everyone was offering the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year fixed rate. And so there was no, arbitrage by going from CBA to ANZ. So you just said, I'm just going to stay at CBA and fix. But, you've got $300, $400, $500 billion of fixed loans that are going to start coming off. Not so much now, because it's 2022, right? All the good fixed rates probably happened like late 2020, going into 2021. So you had, more people fix, some people fix for a year and 2, but a lot of people fix for 3 and 4 years. And so in 2023, 2024, absolutely, you got all these people coming off fixed rates that potentially may move to a very high variable rate, but either way, they're going to get a letter and notified, and they're going to go out to the marketplace. You've also got the loyalty tax, right? Which, if your listeners don't know, basically new customers get better deals than existing customers. The way that the banks make money is they play on your apathy. They know that you're going to get lazy and you're going to watch Netflix and you're not going to want to refinance your home loan. It's now easier than ever to refinance your home loan because all the banks have gone digital. Digital signing of loan docs, the collection of documents is much easier. ID is much easier. You don't have to go to the branch anymore, etc. So it's easier than ever to refinance. It's not that expensive to refinance. It's actually free because all the banks are offering cashback. ANZ came up with a great idea to offer a cashback a few years ago. Now everyone has to offer a cashback to win you as a customer. So ANZ completely screwed over themselves and all the other banks. So there's huge cashbacks, but there's ridiculous pricing happening. All the banks aren't getting loan book growth. You've got places, CBA doing all right, for example, but ANZ are really struggling. NAB are doing really good at the moment. Westpac have got lots of issues, but they're still getting growth. But then you've got places like, Macquarie in particular, who have got, are getting and digital banks and small lenders are getting a decent market share. And so the banks all know they're going into this lower growth period because of lower transactions, right? Less loan book growth, but also they're going to have to fight for their existing customers to keep them, and they're going to offer them better deals. But if they want to win new customers, they're going to have to offer crazy deals. For example, NAB didn't offer great pricing at the start of this year. They went from huge growth to not offering great pricing, so brokers stopped supporting them. Absolutely, brokers are going to put their customers' interests at heart. You can't sell a bank that's not that competitive, right? There's no benefit in doing so. You're just shooting yourself in the foot as brokers. And so and brokers are writing, I think it was 70% of loans in the last quarter or 6 months or something. And so the brokers have won the bank versus broker fight. 7 in 10 loans go through brokers right now. That was 1 or 2 in 10, if you go back in time. And brokers are, servicing their existing book more than they ever have because they know that there's less buyers. So they're calling their existing customers. They're getting pricing. They're looking to refinance. There's more brokers than ever. There's 18,500 brokers versus 16,000 a few years ago. And then you've got the Lendies of the world and other sort of digital brokerages. So, it's a really interesting space over the next few years where the only people really going to get hit, the consumer's going to win. Because you're going to go, yes, you're going to pay a higher mortgage rate because rates are going up, but you're going to get a much bigger discount on that mortgage rate and wipe out a lot of the rate increases. You could be talking a good discount a few years ago might have been 1.5, but now it might be 2.3. It might be 80 basis points under what you were the best deal you could have got 2 or 3 years ago. It's huge how much new customers are getting versus existing customers. And banks are also offering amazing retention at the moment. If you decide to leave or you offer lodge a discharge, you'll probably get a call. You'll probably get offered to match any other deal in the marketplace. You'll probably get offered a cashback to stay with no obligation to actually stay. You could leave in 3 months and take your cash back. It's a real fight for the banks to maintain profitability when all the customers are looking for a better deal. And when we go into a period of rate increases, are you more likely to refinance when rates are going up or rates going down? Absolutely, when rates are going up, because you're actually feeling pain. People are motivated by pain, not pleasure, more so. And so when they see their mortgage page jump and they go, I've got to factor in for that. Oh, can we actually refinance and reduce our mortgage? Can we extend our loan term? Can we do cash out? And so there's more, motivation there for borrowers. And so, and it's actually becoming a 12-month game at the moment, which is crazy. And it's just not right. It's not profitable for the banks if people switch every, 1 year, let alone if they switch every 3 or 4 years. And it's actually becoming in the consumer's best interest to almost refinance every 12 months because you can get yourself a much better deal every 12 months, assuming you're not fixed. That's the refinance game at the moment.
Yeah, and just to underscore, it amazes me just how many people don't get the best rate they could get, right? Either because there's apathy or because, I don't understand. But in this current environment, it is a very easy way of actually solving some of this rate rise problem, isn't it? Because almost certainly...
Absolutely. It's the first thing you should be doing.
Absolutely,
and you could easily save yourself 50, 60, 70 basis points. Pretty much any borrower out there that's got a loan more than 12 months would save that if they're not fixed. And so you can't be whinging about rates going up if you can't be bothered to do a refinance application.
Spot on.
And so that's right. The other thing is, like, all the banks are doing this, thing where, they're allowed to refinance loans without income verification. Now, it hasn't happened yet.
Yes.
But it's happening, right? And so basically you could, if you are, servicing your home loan, which most customers are, right? Paying their mortgage, and you want to refinance your home like for like, and you're not working, but you've been servicing it fine and you can get yourself a better rate and you want to just refinance from one end to the other. Before you couldn't refinance, you were a prisoner. Even if you wanted a better rate, the bank would know that. They could see that you aren't earning any money. They'd just go, I'm not going to give you great retention pricing. But now, going forward, you'll be able to refinance without any income verification, assuming it's a like-for-like loan. That's a game changer. Things around self-employed, you needed average of 2 years, or they took the lower of the 2 years. Now it's back to 12 years, 12 months financials. And a lot of banks are looking at bonus income and, share income. And, bank lending is actually really relaxed at the moment. We're not getting any decline loans. We very rarely ever get decline loans anyway, because we know that it's going to get declined before we lodge it. So we wouldn't lodge it. We check policy. But banks are absolutely willing to lend money, and they need to, because they need to keep their loan books up. So that's making refinance really easy as well. Their turnaround times have come right down as well. So the whole pain of refinancing and waiting a month to then finally hear something and then asking for more documents and it dragging out for 4 or 5 months, which actually just burns out refinance customers. All that, they've all come down because the banks aren't as busy and they're invested in their teams. And so refinancing is much faster now. You can usually do it in, 4 to 8 weeks, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I always say to people, if you're not thinking about what your rate is at least once a year, you're missing an opportunity. And particularly now, because as you say, they're falling over themselves to try and make, and, you can actually go and ask your existing bank, right, to do a bit of rate, and you might actually even get some cash money out of them on the way through, right? So it's ridiculous that you can, but that's the way it is. Okay, that's very cool. Now, here was an interesting question earlier on. How do you define, quote, a good property?
Look, so I guess when you got to think about it, in any suburb, in any city, right, in part of that suburb, it's going to be more desirable to live in that pocket than it is to be in another pocket. So that's your first thing, is you could say, well, why would we want to live in that part of the pocket, right? It's away from the shops, it's away from public transport, it's maybe you got, housing, it's, for example, commission housing, for example. It could be really bad blocks, it could be noisy, it could be flight paths, etc. Just overlay that within a suburb and say, where's the best parts in this suburb to live? And then people are in that suburb are going to want to upgrade into that part of that suburb. And then they're not going to want to leave that part of the suburb because they know that's the best spot. Just walk to the shops, blah, 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 right? Then within that part of the suburb, there's going to be certain streets that are rat runs. Cars are going to drive through and it's going to be noisy and you're going to have, and so that's not going to be the best street in that part of the suburb. But then in the other good streets in that part of the suburb, some are going to be south-facing blocks and the sun hits the front of the property and the sun hits the back of the property. Well, where do you spend most of your time? At the back of the property. So you want the north facing to the rear, right? If you can, etc. Some properties even on that side of the street are going to be weird blocks. They're going to have privacy problems. Or are going to be next to a busy road or have a mechanic next door. So they're not great properties, right? They're compromised. Or some are going to, the house is going to be the weird part of the block. It's going to be right at the back. You have a big front yard but no backyard. Or it's going to have a really weird floor plan. Or it's going to need a lot of work. There's a lot to it. It's like you start at a high level, like on a satellite level, and then you start to zoom down into an individual property level. And it's all about saying, well, what are the compromises people are going to make for that property? And whereabouts is that property located? So no matter what suburb, and then you could have just some parts there's just no good properties, right? You go high density, you're not going to find there's any good properties because it fails the supply test. It also fails the demand test as well. You've got to think about who's the buyer that would want to own that property. What are they earning? Is it one income or is it two incomes? Because how much the people who are buying the property earn and are going to potentially earn in the future is what drives their borrowing capacity. And what drives their borrowing capacity is what drives their prices. And so you can't expect a property in an affordable location that is targeted to median or low incomes to all of a sudden get astronomical growth more than areas where people are getting wage growth and that have got supply restrictions and et cetera. So it all comes down to the buyer, what their financial position is. And that can change over time because of the ripple effect. Buyers, for example, didn't go to the regions. High-income families didn't go to the regions in the past because of the work rules, basically. You had to get to the city 5 days, right? But once that shifted, the high-income families started moving to the regions, right, and started competing on the best parts of those regions. And that's what sent the rockets up, where there's scarcity and where they would leave a city for. It's not everywhere in the regions went up. If you looked in the middle and outer suburbs of, say, the Central Coast or Wollongong, that didn't go up as much as where you are in Thurrool, Martin, for example. Yep. Or the apartments in Thurrool didn't go up anywhere near as much as the houses. And so, that's when you say what's a good property, you have to, it is deep and it does take time and it will, and most properties fail a test. there's something about them that just isn't great. And so it's next property. It literally is that. You don't marry the first person you meet, do you? And so you shouldn't fall in love with the first person you see. For first property, you see. It's 9:15 at night here, Martin. But hopefully that answers your question. It is actually a thought process, and you have to go through it. And then at some point, there's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Now,
and I was going to say, Chris, sometimes if you're looking at a property, you've got to play the devil's advocate, right? Because your eye will go to the positives rather than the negatives, particularly if you've got an emotional reaction to it, right?
I am buying property. I'm actually the worst at this, right? I see the positives, right? When I'm with my clients, I see the negatives, right? I want to see the things that go wrong.
Yeah.
When I'm out buying there, I'm falling in love with it. I'm thinking about the envisage, what we could do to the place, etc. And trying to overlook things. And that's what most buyers do, especially when you've been in the marketplace for a little bit of time. You start missing out. You start making more and more subconscious, compromises. You start self-justifying why this property can work for you, etc. You don't want to go through the pain of auctions, etc. And that's why poor properties sell well in hot markets, is because everyone's just desperate and they're wounded bulls and they'll just buy anything. In this market, absolutely, you don't need to be doing that. And you shouldn't be doing it in the other market anyway. But yeah, that's the big issue, because they're the properties that, that you see the days on market will start to really expand, that you'll get the silly offers, because people are like, I know you can't sell this thing. I know you want 1.5 million for it. I'm going to give you an offer of 1.1. And, they'll just try to find, because they'll be bargain hunting, etc. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say that is a very, very important question for people to think about, right? And there are some objective things that make good properties good almost universally, right? And it's very important to understand what those are, because sometimes you get just caught in the wave of, what you see, and then you miss the obviously. And the other thing, I was talking to Edwin Almeida yesterday, and he said, it's quite interesting. Looking at property in the rain is quite good, because you can see some of the defects, right? Because if it's raining, you're going to see where the water's falling off or whatever, or where the water's sitting. So it's quite interesting, just to bearing in mind that when you see a property is also quite important, right? And sometimes
absolutely. I mean, the agent does the open home the absolute optimal time when the sun's shining through perfectly in the backyard, and etc. But they don't show it when the school buses are going through and it's busy and it's a Saturday and it's this and it's that. And so, that's where the local knowledge really comes into it. We get, a lot of clients have to buy in areas that they're not living today. And if you're thinking about moving to an area, just move there now. Break your lease, rent something, just get into the local market. It's not enough driving there on a Saturday and looking at 3 homes and then quickly leaving the suburb. You want to know what the locals love, what are the issues, because once you bought the property, it's too late. 3 months later, you can move in, you go, God, I didn't know that everyone cut through here at 5 o'clock in the morning, and etc. And so these, and view it at different times and ask to see it multiple times from the agent. Be that annoying buyer. There's no point trying to be nice to the agent. You're making a long-term financial decision here. They understand. Don't go look at it 6 times and, just because there's something wrong. It's probably a sign to keep looking. If you keep looking at it that many times, there's your gut's telling you something. There's something's not right. But yeah, definitely go and see it a few times. And if you fall in love with a property, right, go and see it the next day. Like, don't be like, go back home and, get on with other stuff and get work on a Monday, and then on Thursday, Friday, call the agent back and try to see it again. Like, you're missing time, and speed is everything. You want that agent to know that you're a buyer that really wants that property. Don't be like, try to play it cool. You want in their mind to think that you're the best buyer to a certain price. And you want to go and look at it, and you want them to, in their mind, try to match you up to the property. Because if it's a good property, you've got to make these two worlds meet. If you're the buyer that always sits on their hands and tries to play it too cool and too smart, you're the buyer that never buys. And you're the buyer that always whinges that they shouldn't buy and the prices go up. When prices go up, you start justifying why prices are going to fall. And you start watching Martin North. But
meow.
But you know what I mean? That's what happens. It's that analysis paralysis, which a certain part of the society are. And they overthinkers, and they overanalyze, and they never want to meet the market. The problem is when they're in the market and they want to sell one day, they want the market to come meet them because they overvalue what their price is worth. They're the ones who overvalue it the most because they overthink what it's worth and they are natural behavioural bias. So, yeah.
And I'll just add one point. If the only day that they will let you see the property is a Sunday, worry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. This was from earlier on. Why are CPAs worried about issuing letters of capacity to pay certificates as reported in the ABC? In fact, I did a show on this earlier on. So basically, the various accounting bodies have written to their members to say no longer provide letters of capacity to pay to the banks because they fear that they could actually ultimately end up with the liability because of that. And they also perhaps could be accused of actually providing financial advice when they don't have a license.
Yeah, it's we don't really do much in the low doc space where you need these letters. We work off financials, and rather than forecasted income and what etc. We just don't play in that space in the low doc space. Some brokers do, and they'll have to have a great relationship with the local accountant who can give them these letters and etc. We don't do anything in this self-managed super fund loan space as well. We could. We've got a lot of clients that have got a lot of money in super. We could be doing self-managed super fund loans. We just don't think it's a great idea for our clients. It's stating the obvious, right? Like the accountant's got to potentially be liable here if they're sending that to the bank, and then the banks, if when things hit the fan, people look for people to blame. And so if I was an accountant, I wouldn't want to be signing those letters. And I was absolutely certain that it wasn't going to come back on me.
Exactly right. And so I think those are the reasons. There's a legal reason. There's also a financial reason. In fact, ASIC wrote to the industry and said, look, there's some things you need to be aware of some time ago, I think in 2018. Okay, Chris, 50-year mortgage is the next topic, right? So Boris Johnson was interviewed last weekend, and Boris said one of the things they're thinking about is the 50-year mortgage. Right, and I did a post, in fact, a few days ago, highlighting the fact that with a 50-year mortgage, the bank gets pretty much double the interest, and you reduce the repayments, marginally over that longer period. Your reaction?
Well, if I could get a 50-year mortgage, I would. The reality is, what a bank wants you to pay it off with, and what you do is completely different things anyway. What a minimum repayment is on a mortgage doesn't really matter. Like if you're basing your life around what the bank wants you to pay your mortgage off, like you said, Martin, you got to pay a lot of interest. You're not taking control of your own financial situations. You're letting the rules of the game be set for you. Your rules of life is you have to pay that minimum repayment. Look, that's not, good financial management. Yes, absolutely. That is what and you should actually be trying to reduce that as much as you can. You should be extending your loan terms. A lot of clients say, what's my loan term? And I'll say, well, it's 27 years to go. Oh, I don't want to extend that. So, well, if you do extend it, you reduce your minimum repayment and you build up more money in offset accounts, which gives you more buffers. From a financial management point of view, you're actually already good with your money. You're already paying your mortgage off much faster than that. And so extending a long mortgage loan terms is good for you as a borrower. Is it great for the property market? Absolutely not, right? Because you increase how much people can borrow. A lot of people only pay the minimum repayment. You can see how much people have in arrears. That means they're not paying their minimum repayment, right? They've got no money in offset accounts. They are spending every dollar. We all know the stats in society, what percentage, it's a lot. And so absolutely all you would see in that situation is an increase to consumer spending and a reduction to consumer debt.
Yep.
Household debt, really, in terms of how much people pay off.
Or pass it to the next generation, right? So
absolutely. But 50 million mortgages happen today.
Yeah. Yep.
So, if you get a 30-year mortgage when you're 30, you're 60, and then you refinance that mortgage when you're 50 for another 30 years, which you can do right now. You can even do it when you're 60. That is a 50-year mortgage.
Yep.
And so, they happen today. They exist. It's just, and it actually makes good sense. If you know what you're doing, what you're doing with your finances and you know how to use offset accounts, I would actually argue that, you actually want to slow down how you pay your mortgage off as long as you keep that money in the offset account, because you become asset rich and you also become cash rich. And it actually makes sense to release equity and put that money in offset accounts if you haven't got sticky fingers.
I think that's the really important point. If you can actually keep the money there and not use it, right? The danger is you end up spending it, right, because you've got it. And then that falls apart.
Absolutely right. And so there's some clients that you look at their spending on a month-to-month basis, and they earn it's not about how much money you earn, it's how much money you spend. And they spend a lot of money and they never have money, and no matter what they earn, they spend it. Absolutely. They're the worst person. And they actually, you got this one, recently we were giving him advice. So this is what you should do and blah, blah, blah. And he said to us, look, I can't do that. I know myself. Yes. I've got to put restrictions on myself. I've got to, reduce my loan term. I cannot give us that money. I know what I'm like. We're going to go on holidays and we're going to a wedding, etc. So absolutely, it comes down to personal control. But you could argue that, the people who do know how to do things, you're basically saying you can't do that. Well, you're basically saying the people, you're sort of discriminating against the people who are good with their finances. And so
I think my view is, as long as people have been able to think through the pros and the cons, and that they are comfortable that they can control it, it's not a problem. What I see, unfortunately, again and again, is that people effectively end up trying to do both, right, and end up then with a huge pile of debt that they can't manage, and then they get into terrible trouble. And unfortunately, the most simple way of solving it is to pay the debt down quicker rather than slower.
Oh, absolutely, right? Like you still want to pay your debt down, but you just want to pay it down by saving a certain amount in the offset account. Now, people listening to your show, Martin, aren't typically going to be the people who are at that end of the spectrum, right?
That's probably true, because they know that I think that debt is a bad thing and easy to get rid of.
Exactly. And so they're going to be doing this stuff. And if we're going to be doing this education, we should be doing it in certain other communities, for example. Yeah,
fair enough. Yes.
But
yes.
The reality is, the people who are a bit switched on with their finances should be doing these things.
Yep.
You should be refinancing, you should be releasing, should be extending your loan terms, should be using offset accounts, should be investing, should be, etc. Not what idealistic what you think should happen to society doesn't mean that's how you should behave your own sort of personal finances. If you're not going to take control of your own finances, who is? You aren't going to make these big decisions. So it's all about sort of personal responsibility.
That's a good idea, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, last question for the night. This is from Cookie Boy. Going back to the land tax. Chris's thoughts on New South Wales land tax announcement for first home buyers, right? For or against it, but it's up to 1.5 million. Does it really make much difference?
Cookie, I know you're a big fan of Martin North on the show. Look, I'm conflicted on this one. Look, anything that encourages more demand without solving the underlying issues of housing unaffordability and understanding the issues around land release and developer tax and lots and lots of things, right? There's issues with the housing. This is just completely a demand push. Look, are the people who are being pushed out of the housing market the worst first-home buyers, and have they got a big disadvantage? And absolutely. Is the stamp duty a good tax? Is it fair to be paying 5% of a purchase price in stamp duty? Probably not. And so I do think it is good in terms of, I think it is fairer for first-home buyers who are paying more than ever for property, and encouraging them to get more into home ownership and less in the state government coffers. So it's more wins but what you are absolutely going to do is create higher prices. And that's going to be more than the stamp duty. So you're not getting a free kick here, first home buyers. What it is allowing you to do is buy sooner, because it's easier to save 120 grand than it is to save 180 grand, which is a big gap. It's massive, right? And the reason I say that is I'm talking properties, 1.2 to 1.5 million. And, this is where you're going to see a real demand push in, bigger, older apartments in housing markets that are in that price point, sub 1.5, 1.2. So maybe Central Coast, down near where you are, Martin. That's a perfect market for, first home buyers looking to relocate and buy houses. And so, yeah, absolutely, you will see. And also because people feel like they're so close to it, they'll create more because they're like, oh, wow, actually, I can actually do it now. This is exactly what happened with low rates and these 5% deposit home schools. You just create all this demand. So I'm really conflicted with it. I do think it's got a little bit of a right balance. I don't think it's for investors. I don't think it's for upgraders. And there is a limit on it. It's not saying, people buying their first home at 3 mil can get it, etc. So there is but it is high enough. Like if it was at $1 million, it would have, still been a bit of like, well, who are you really helping? So I think it's the sort of right level. But yeah, obviously I'm conflicted. It's really a demand play. It's bringing forward future demands today, and it's impacting the demand of tomorrow, which will be a lot more than 5%.
So it's not really solving the underlying issue, is it at all? It's sort of
absolutely
messing
not
around the edge.
But it is changing probably 300,000, maybe not that much, a few 100,000 first home buyers
150
over the next few years will benefit from that.
Yep.
And it is probably a right time to make that decision. Like, you're not doing this at the heat of the market. You are doing it in a market that is a bit more depressed. And you can see first home buyer rates actually dropping.
Yep.
Investors have had we're still seeing, a real strong with investors late last year. And we're seeing a lot of investors coming into the market this year. Because we've got the type of clientele that are doing well financially, right? Who have got strong trajectory, who've got good borrowing capacities, who have got lots of equity. And so what they're doing is saying, well, now I'm going to go and buy an investment property. And I'm not worried about higher rates. Interest only is really easy to get nowadays. Rents are going up. I can service that cash flow. I've got negative gearing. I've got a 40-50% tax deduction, etc. I'm confident over the next 5 years, I can hold that asset. And so, hopefully, it's a really conflicted. From a broking point of view, it's great, right? So a lot of people say, it's what of course he's going to say is a mortgage broker. Well, no, I'm not putting what's in my interest at the forefront here. I'm putting what's interested the bigger picture. And so absolutely, for the broking industry, they love it.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Chris. Now, one very last subsequent question from Michael. Just, is it a best practice to keep additional funds in an offset account or pay down the variable loans as quickly as possible? I think the answer is it depends, right? It depends on your financial capability and your ability to be able to not spend it.
Well, if you pay down a variable loan, Martin, you can probably pull the money out on redraw.
Right.
So, whether you can, there is a psychological thing, right? Like, if my loan gets paid down, I don't want to take it, right?
Yep.
I don't want to do that. It's a bad thing to do.
Yep.
Whereas to take money out of the offset account, it's a little bit easier to justify it to yourself. So you could argue that behavioural difference.
Yep.
I mean, really, technically, you would put it in the offset account. Best practice would be that. The best financial outcome for you, high liquidity and the same amount of interest. And so you can't argue with it. The reality is it comes down to your human behaviour then changes things.
If you psychologically can cope with having money in your account and not touching it, fine. If you can't, if you know it's going to burn a hole in your pocket or your wallet, it's probably not the right solution.
Yeah. Then make sure you go to bank with can't do redraw. You'll just convince yourself. Like, you'll justify yourself.
Yeah.
That's what people make. And so there are things you can do to stop yourself, right? So lose your internet banking details. You can always reset it if you have to, right? Don't have a card on your offset account. Don't do your day-to-day banking at the bank that you got your mortgage at.
Yeah.
Like, set up a direct debit for your mortgage repayment to come out of your offset account. And so you don't actually even see this happen. Like, I've got banking across different banks, but I don't do my day-to-day banking, right, at the same banks where I've got mortgages. And if I do, I will just say to the bank, deactivate my home loan on my internet banking. I don't want to see my home loan. I don't want to see my offset account. Even if you're at the bank of that bank, you can easily do that. And then what you do is in your pay, the day that you get paid, you've got two choices. If you really want to get technical with behavioral finance, you get work to pay a certain amount into one account and you get work to pay a certain amount into another account. So let's say you get $10,000 a month, right? You get work to pay $6,000 into your mortgage offset account and you get paid $4,000 into your day-to-day banking account. And technically what you should then do is pay $2,000 out of that into a fixed cost account straight away. So all of a sudden your 10 grand has already reduced down to 2 grand in your day-to-day spending account. And if you want to get technical after that, then you could break it down to weekly payments to force yourself to spend within weekly amounts. But that's how you manage your spending, because you're not getting paid 10 grand a month. When you think you're getting paid 10 grand a month, you spend like you're earning $10,000 a month. You're not. You're earning $2,000 a month. So when you spend $100 on a dinner, you're spending $100 out of $2,000 a month. That's 5% of your monthly spend on that dinner. Is it worth it? But if you think I'm spending $100 out of a $10,000 a month income, that's 1%. It doesn't matter. But what you're not factoring in is all those other fixed costs, what you're trying to do with your saving goals, paying off your mortgage. And so that's the biggest behavioral thing you can do is cut your income down to the level and see that going to an account and then live off that.
Yep.
And then automate everything else. It's So, and you can do that with a mortgage offset. And then you come back in a year's time, then you go to a bank and you refinance and you just leave that money offset. Don't get sticky fingers. But yeah.
Chris, is a very good point. Thank you. And that's a wonderful way to end the show. The point is there are simple things that you can do to change your behaviors, right? And control. And this is about control and management, I think, more than anything else. And that's one of the reasons why I'm quite keen to have these sorts of conversations with you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. If people want to find out more about what you do, where do they go?
Jump on, follow us on LinkedIn. I post a bit on that when I can be motivated. Chris Bates, or just check out our website, wealthful.com.au, wealth and FUL. And yeah, we obviously mortgage brokers. We help, higher income, double income young families. And so if you're in that boat, we'd love to hear from you.
Great, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll do it again soon, I'm sure. And I'm sure by the time we do it again, the markets will have changed again.
Absolutely, Martin. I'll see you in a few months.
See ya. Take
Cheers.
care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Good night.
There you go, folks. Well, we'll just close the show now. And just to say thanks to Chris, a very interesting conversation, and I hope some of those questions that we answered were of help. Just to say that next week, Tony LaCantro will be on, as I mentioned earlier on. I've called it the approaching storm, so it'll be an interesting conversation next week, particularly on the investment perspective. So mark your diaries and join us for that. And I've got a doggy on my lap. Ooh, there you go. Say goodnight. There we go. Say goodnight. There we go. There we go. Yes, good girl. There we go. So that's doggy Cam. The other doggy has gone away. So there you go. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you next week, and check our other shows during the week. And take care, keep well, and keep dry. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio.